Joining us now is Parag Khanna. He's the author of The Future is Asian: Commerce, Conflict, and Culture in the 21st Century. Parag, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
All right, so you make the argument in this book that it is time for the U.S. to shift its eggs out of China's basket.
Right.
Why is that?
Well, let's bear in mind that the smart companies of corporate America have already been doing that. They've realized that Chinese labor costs are rising, wages are rising, so they have to actually shift to lower cost production markets like Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines. All these countries have very eager and willing workforces, plus we have freer trade agreements with them as well. So it's win-win actually, but we have to do it a lot more because we know that China is moving up the value chain so quickly. There's all of the legal issues of the trade war, IP theft, and so on. So yes, I mean, I think that the smart companies have already done it, but there's a lot more of corporate America that has to learn this lesson.
So your argument is about manufacturing and production rather than about selling to the Chinese consumer.
Well, it's actually both. So first of all, when you're talking about China, whether it's hardware or whether it is, software services and so forth, there have been substantial revenues, obviously, that American companies and Western companies more generally have achieved in China.
Nike, Starbucks,
without
Apple.
a doubt.
China is so important to
It is very important. But Asia is 5 billion people, and only 1.5 billion of them are in China. Not to mention the fact that in India and Southeast Asia, you have younger populations, rapid urbanization, again, growth rates that are even faster than China's. So China is not something that's separate from Asia. It's part of Asia, and we have been focused only on one part of Asia rather than the entire rest. The next wave of Asian growth is the rest, those other couple of billion consumers that many companies have actually been ignoring all this time.
But is it too late for American companies? Because we've actually seen Chinese companies do a very good job of getting into those markets.
Great question. No, it's not, because it's still very early days. These are very open, competitive, sort of liberal political economies, democratic societies, so it's just the beginning for them. You know, the per capita income in some of these countries is only $2,000 or $3,000, right? We should expect it rightly to move to $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000. And remember, their populations are a couple of billion people. So far too early to say who's going to win in these places. Now remember, American tech companies, software, social media, Facebook, Google, Amazon, and so forth, have been doing great in India and Southeast Asia. Why? Because as you know, they were never really in China. Right, so they actually set or sort of paved the way for the rest of companies to look at these other markets too.
Is the trade war a good or a bad move on the part of the U.S.?
Oof, almost all bad. So it's very good to create an alignment across our allies in Europe and elsewhere, and between the administration and the government, the administration and companies, about the need to call out China on IP theft and forced technology transfer. On that, we are all in agreement, and we have been for a long time. This predates Trump. But if you ask CEOs, how would they conduct this trade war? They would not do it in this way, because the reciprocal tariffs, the long-term implications of China saying, you know what, let's just not buy American anymore. We're going to feel this 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now.
Already, even if there is a resolution.
Yeah, absolutely, we're feeling it already.
Who has the upper hand in these negotiations? Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin right now in Beijing with Robert Lighthizer,
yes,
meeting with Chinese officials
right,
in order to try to hash out a trade deal before that March 1st deadline.
Yeah.
Who has the upper hand here?
What they're hashing out is a compromise that can be articulated before March 1 in order to kind of stave off, the final set of tariffs being imposed on the remaining volume of Chinese imports. They're not really going to hash out a long-term solution, right? Now, China will be seen to have done enough by that point in time. It'll say, okay, we're going to allow certain American goods back in, we're going to lower the tariffs on those, we're going to make sure to open up automotive and a couple of other sectors, we'll make some areas more competitive, we'll allow foreigners to own 51% of their ventures in the country, bit by bit. But that's kind of on the margins for them, because as you rightly pointed out, their companies are getting super competitive. They already have the dominant market share in their own economy, and they're competing aggressively elsewhere. So all they want is to just do the bare minimum, and that's really all they're going to do. And we have an incentive to accept that in a way, because our companies, again, really want back into that market. We're seeing Qualcomm, Nvidia, Apple, Intel, everyone soon, Boeing, is going to report declining revenue in China. They really want back in.
So we've seen many companies, the biggest tech companies too, like Apple, try to push into India, right?
Yes.
A massively growing market there
That's
as
right.
well. I mean, what do you lay out in the book that shows these American companies have ignored places other than China.
Well, India is a very good example because if you think about it, a couple of years ago when Tim Cook started going to India and lobbying to be able to open an Apple retail store, the Indian government said no, not unless you procure from Indian suppliers for components the way you do with Korea and Japan and China. And they were at loggerheads, they couldn't agree. But given the bad news that Apple has had out of China in terms of declining revenue, they had to go back to India and say, you know what? Fine, let's do final assembly of the latest iPhone models in India. We really want into your market. So again, it's kind of goes back to your question earlier, is it too late? No, it's not too late, right? India is a massive growing middle class consumer market. Of course, they're going to sell a lot more iPhones in India now.
The book is about China, but I want to talk about India too.
Right, no, the book is about all of Asia and only a third of it is about China.
Okay, so let's talk a little more about India and retail in India, because one story that we follow closely is Amazon and Walmart's ambitions in India.
Exactly.
One of the reasons they're so excited about India is because the way they've been shut out and prevented from doing lots of business in China, like the tech companies. What is the retail opportunity for American companies like Walmart and Amazon in India?
Well, to be fair, Walmart has tried very hard in China with joint ventures around e-commerce and so forth. Right, it's been ugly for sure. But again, the effort has to be made in order to capture that market, and sometimes it has to be done through joint ventures, especially in China. Now, India, again, even though it's a democratic society, we think of it as a more open, free market. They have gotten wise. They have looked at how China has regulated foreign investment to suit their purposes, and they're kind of copying some of those practices. The Make in India campaign is like that as well. Now the regulators are saying, hold on, we don't want our local industries and artisans and suppliers going bankrupt and being kind of wiped out by Amazon. So you cannot include the companies that you own in the country of India into your marketplace. You have to keep them out, and that's going to help local competition. So all of these things are that's what Walmart has to navigate as it has bought e-commerce, Flipkart, and that's what Amazon is going to have to do as well.
So obviously we see that a lot of U.S. tech companies have serious competition from their Asian counterparts. And so are there certain industries in the U.S. that are better suited to succeed in Asia than others?
That's a fantastic question. But you know, Asia is such a broad landscape. It depends on the level of development, the things that they can already make themselves, you know, versus the things that they really do need to import. So the answer varies very much country by country. But look, our best face to the world is definitely our digital technology, right, and our science and so forth. And these are the areas that are not yet being substituted wholesale, rapidly. Electronics, no way. It's a commodity at this point, right? China used to import 60% of the components it needed to make all of the CD players and computers and so forth. Now it imports less than 15% of those components, right? So for every country, you have to look and see what is it that they still need from us. And obviously, the higher up the value chain it is, semiconductors and so forth, I mentioned earlier, again, Qualcomm, NVIDIA, these are all really world-beating technology companies. So we have to make sure that we are not doing anything to hamper their access to those markets.
Parag Khanna, the author of The Future is Asian: Commerce, Conflict, and Culture in the 21st Century. The book is on sale now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, pleasure.